Welcome back to Ray's Talk Show. This is your virtual big brother, Ray Collazo. Thank you so much for joining what I think is going to be an incredible edition of Ray's Talk Show. Really excited about it. Ray's Talk Show, for those who are not aware, helps talented and service-oriented people find wealth in their voice through reinventing themselves, escaping that cage of an uninspiring job to a career that truly helps you find wealth in your voice through personal satisfaction. Thank you again so much for joining the show, particularly our audience here on the live Blab. You can check out Ray's Talk Show every Tuesday and Thursday night on the Blab platform, as well as just go to our website, bigbrotherray.com. That's bigbrotherray.com. And special shout out to my podcast listeners. We were birthed as a podcast a few years back, and really appreciate our folks listening through that platform as well. And I have some special announcements related to our podcast footprint, which I'll be mentioning later in the show. But wanted to mention, this is, we were just talking about sports before we started recording, and I feel like I finally was able to get the first pick in the draft. Those NBA teams, and they get the ping pong balls, because we wanted this guest for quite some time, and someone that we were blessed to meet through the Blab platform, a great friend to the show, Dr. Tachiada. Welcome to Ray's Talk Show.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. It finally.
Yeah, well, usually there was always it's too late. It's too late. I'm not ready. I got things to do. I got to wake up early in the morning. But, sorry, we're not all night owls like me. But it's a pleasure to finally have you on the show.
Well, I'm a night owl. I just changed into pajamas. And so they're like, yeah, jump in. I'm like, brother, no.
Well, you definitely, along with our friends like Durham, that's watching here on the Blab, and I hope she gets to join us in a little bit. You're definitely one of the most active chatters that we have on live shows. So yeah, I just want more people to hear your voice, Tachi. What can I say? So
well, thank you. I appreciate that.
And Tachi's like me. She's got a lot of acronyms, a lot of aliases. Some call it the Nigerian princess. I mean, there's a lot of different aliases. But for those that are not familiar, Dr. Tachiada, aka our great friend Tachi, is a communications expert and media analyst who, amongst many things, hosts Mediascope, which you can find on many live stream platforms like Periscope. And we're going to talk about Tachi's take on the live streaming landscape from our perspective. And she really, in true Nigerian style, she does it all. Acting, documentarian, filmmaker, academic at the University of Maryland. Her work's been featured in publications like the Burton Wire and the Griot, and a great friend, Ray's Talk Show. Tachi, welcome. Finally, welcome as a formal guest on Ray's Talk.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, and I referenced it a moment ago in jest, but definitely want to shout out. This episode is dedicated to, and particularly our Nigerian American friends. It's a wonderful community. I was explaining to Tachi earlier that through neighbors and various family associations, we were blessed to have a great rapport with really all the African and West African immigrant communities, but in particular our Nigerians, from my fandom of Akeem Olajuwon to the old days to the modern day, with all of our great friends like Lonray Brooks, a great friend of my brother Mike's, and many other friends. So much respect to our Nigerian brothers and sisters, and definitely dedicated this show in your honor, like our great friend here, Tachi. Tachi, welcome to the show. And
Thank you.
I just want to start from the beginning. We're going to talk later in the show about your perspective on, there's lots of perspectives, but definitely your perspective as a media analyst on the impact of lemonade on our culture's conversations about social media, about how the conversations, particularly Black women, are having about not only the content, but how sort of it was sprung on us over the weekend. That's been a hot topic, and we're going to get into a lot of issues around diversity in media and in social media. But first, Dr. Chitachi, before you became the host of Mediascope and all these different platforms, that's just not where the journey began. So, Dr. Tachi, where did this journey begin for you?
Yeah, before all of that, I just was. I think I just existed. You want me to start from the beginning?
Well,
or
what do we need to know about what led you to this point? That's really the purpose of that question.
Oh, so this has been an interesting journey, because I've always kind of been a media practitioner. I started off wanting to, well, this is the funny thing. I actually wanted to be a fashion designer, which I've kind of come full scale back to, but that's a different story. But I always wanted to be a fashion designer. And I'm Nigerian, that wasn't going to fly initially when I said I wanted to do that. And
Sure,
so,
be a doctor or an engineer.
look, doctor, lawyer, engineer, those are the three.
That's it. That's it.
Yes, that's what you do when you're Nigerian. So my father asked me, this was like in 8th grade now, because they start asking this conversation, talking about this early. I was like, oh yeah, I think I want to be a fashion designer. If you had seen my father's face, he said, no, 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 fashion, no, 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 that's not the good. So he was the one who actually said, well, you like, because I'd always been involved in theater and dance. So he said, well, you like theater, you like dance, why don't you think about mass communication? So I was like, oh, okay, whatever that is. And I actually started to explore it a little more and find out, well, these are all the things that I really love. I love television. I love the writing end of it. So yeah, let me look at that. And that's actually how I started to pursue all these different avenues in terms of mass comm. So I started off in radio. I was at WBLK in Buffalo, New York, as promotion staff. So I was an intern and then in promotion staff. And then I went away to graduate school. I went to Howard University for graduate school, and I became the assistant program director and then program director at WHBC, which was the student run. All the same time, though, my major was communication, but also independent film and television. And so independent filmmaking, basically, and video. So I had always been making product, always been doing short stuff. And this was it's funny to say the old days of video, because the old days of video were not that long ago. So, you know, the big old VHS thing that I would carry on my shoulder. Everybody knew me with a camera. Everybody always saw me with a camera. Always had it trailing behind me, because you never know what was going to jump off. So I always had one with me. So that's kind of where I started in the film, in the radio end of it. And I did not intend. I thought that I was going to do this. Or, you know, either film or work in radio, or I was also very interested in PR and had done some PR work. So I said, okay, I think I might like to do PR for the music industry. And then I actually, once you get in radio, you also kind of work with the music industry. And I decided, yeah, that's not quite what I want to do. I don't think I'm built for that. And ended up going to graduate school. And then in graduate school, you get really theoretical, and everything becomes about, yeah, exactly, because about research or whatever. And then you're getting groomed to be an academic. So you forget all about that practical side, the things that make you love communication in the first place, or me anyway. And then, so I graduated. It was funny. I graduated. I got my PhD from Howard in 2005.
Okay.
The month after I graduated, I went back to New York Film Academy so that I could learn everything that had happened. Because in the course of maybe like less than 10 years, in the course of actually like 5 years or so, everything had changed over from analog to digital. So now people were editing with computers, as opposed to how I learned with the cut, splice, tape, send everything out for processing, get it back, look at it, hope that it all works out well. And then, you know, the video for the 2 monitors and everything had really changed. So I said, oh, I have to learn this, because I really had this desire to start to make media again. So that's kind of where that journey started.
Absolutely. No. And what I love about that question, and I love about my guest, is that the answer to that question gives us such a great blueprint, not only for the conversation, but also a guide for people about their own journey. So, I mean, there's several things you mentioned there, Tachi, but the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is that so oftentimes our friends, and I actually was just doing a coaching session with a woman of color who has a PhD in higher education from Harvard, and she's struggling what to do a career, because she feels, because the degree was in something relatively narrow, she feels like trapped, because she's like, well, I don't want to be an academic teaching this one narrow element of education. I want to do many other things. What I was explaining to her was, I was like, hey, if I had a PhD from Harvard, I would perpetrate to do anything. But that's just me. Second of all, I said, don't feel trapped by it's so many of our people, particularly people of color, because it's drilled into them to be practical and like, have this certain path, is that we feel trapped by our resumes. And I'm like, it's not about what's on your resume. It's about the skills and the passions that you've developed over the years. And that's what I love about your story, Tachi, is that, if you want to do different things, guess what? You do them because you have a passion. You learn what's necessary in that craft. So Tachi, in your experience, talking to other professionals of color in particular, that are relatively highly educated but feel limited by their education background, what's been your secret to sort of branch off and grow and understanding that your degrees are just a beginning?
That's a great question. And it as you were telling me the story of this Harvard PhD, this is something that I'm passionate about talking about especially when people are going for education past the bachelor's degree. I'm like, you really have to be thoughtful about that and not just do it because this is going to get you a job later, or you think this is going to get you a job or a higher paying job, or so that you can be called Dr. such and such. You really have to be thoughtful about it, because you could spend time, energy, and a lot of money, and it will not yield anything for you. Absolutely. So for me, number one, the field of communication, and mass comm in particular, is so varied that there are a lot of different things that you can do. So that's why I'm very happy that I was able to do that, because media is my main thing, but I'm also a communication generalist. So for 15 years, I've also been teaching public speaking and presentation making, business communication. I've taught performance studies, because so I've had the opportunity to do a lot of things. And because I varied my interests, I'm also a dancer choreographer. The reason I was asked to teach performance studies is because of my theater, dance, and choreography background. And it is a discipline that grew out of communication. So that makes me that much more, I guess, marketable, because I have other interests. So it's about the experience. So the degrees are very helpful, but at the end of the day, it doesn't mean a damn thing if all you know is what you've read in your books. All you know is theory. So I've always made it my point to make sure that I'm a practitioner as well. So, I mean, one of the big reasons that I do Mediascope and I do the film and all the things that I do at the same time teach is because I don't believe that you can be a media professor and not participate in media. To me, it doesn't make any sense. Even if you are a media theorist, media is practical. Okay. Media, you only have theories that exist because of what there is a physical media to study. How do you not know certain platforms? How do you not know what goes on? That doesn't mean you have to know everything. I don't know everything, but I make it my business to try and learn. And so I think, in answer to your question, the big thing is to be a practitioner, to practice whatever it is that you're teaching.
Amen, sister. Well, I'm going to give you some hands for that one, because I'm so passionate about that. One of the other things I had a great conversation, and the more I think about it, I think I need to connect you with her, because you two you could be very helpful to her in her journey. But one of the things I'm very passionate about with the people I coach is that I don't care if you don't think you're a quote unquote communicator or a social media expert or what have you. You've got to produce some content. And I said, and I told this person, I said, you need to. I don't really care if it's blogging, or she was talking about how she's like an introvert and stuff. I said, look, I don't care if you share it with me in the beginning. I said, I'm not saying you have to put it on a blog and put it on social media, but I said, I think you need to start producing some content, because that's how you're going to help find your voice. That's how you're going to, for lack of a better term, kind of work your material. I said, look, when you see a stand-up comedian do an HBO special, they've done that routine in front of 50 audiences. Right. And so, the 13th time the joke worked better if you flip the order, and the 28th time they realized this joke just wasn't working, or they hide, and you just, it helps you hone your voice. And so I think it's very important that, and it can be in different elements. I told her, I said, look, I don't care if you write a haiku. I just think I'm not so much concerned about the genre, but I think you just need to be, expressing yourself. And like you said, it could be in a lot of different things. The other thing I wanted you to touch base, Tachi, about your story, which I think is so important, is that, again, and I struggle with this at times, but there's this struggle between people like you and I that have lots of interests, lots of skills, I would say lots of talents, but especially in the online game and in like society, to like pick one thing, do this one little thing, and like, drill down. And there's a balance to that. But can you share about how you have been able to do it all? Because you're not allowing definitions of a career to limit what you're able to do to have a career that reflects all of your interests and passions.
I thank you for thinking that I'm able to do it all. I try very hard.
At least that's what your extensive bio says. Anyway.
I just have a lot of interest, and I'm like, life is for living. There's no reason you should not explore every aspect of all the things you're interested in and that you're good at.
Amen.
If you look at a lot of actors, let's talk about some of the actors that are very well known, Hollywood A-listers, etc. None of them are ever doing one thing. Why? Because in that field, you're really only as good as your last job. So if you only rely on acting, tomorrow your film is over. Tomorrow your season is your television show is dropped.
Right.
Your series is dropped.
That's right.
Then what?
40, you end up being you end up getting booted to television.
Exactly, which in this day and age is not a bad thing.
No, well,
more and more, we're seeing these quote unquote traditional Hollywood A-list film actors now really looking
back on like CBS, but that's another story.
Well, because it's a taboo. It's not a taboo anymore, and television is not necessarily the death of your career. Where now you're doing TV, because it's proliferated so much. There's no such thing. Media is seamless, so that I guess that's a whole other story. But yeah, absolutely. And so the whole thing is, if you only rely on one thing, and I'm looking at it now from a revenue and a money making aspect. If you only rely on that one thing, you could be done for if that one thing goes away. And that's not to say everybody has to do everything. Some people don't have the attention span, the wherewithal, or the desire to do more than one thing. But then you have to look, if that one thing goes away, what do I have? How can I parlay my talent into something else? And I think we should always be thinking that way, which is probably why I do all the things that I do. But it's definitely not just for a money thing. I actually enjoy all the things that I do, and they're actually all related. They're all communication based in some way, shape, or form. So that's how I've been able to do it all. And that and a really, really good schedule. The fact that I now have a schedule that's more flexible is key to doing that, and I purposely made it that way.
Yeah, well, that's another story for another time. The academic hustle, in terms of one of the reasons that academia can be attractive is you can have some flexibility in terms of your time. But so I've definitely had friends that have been able to utilize that platform to leverage other opportunities, because you have a little more time than your average employee of a company or an organization. But we're talking to Dr. Chitachi Egwu from the Mediascope and many other platforms, and really excited about it. You've got all kind of interesting documentaries that you're developing and short films, and definitely later in the show shout those out. But I did, you one of the things, as you're talking about your various interests, Tachi, I think it's really interesting to note that it brings me back to, at the end of the day, though, it goes back to having a brand, because whether Tachi's dancing, Tachi's live streaming, Tachi's teaching a course, it doesn't conflict with the brand and the image that you come across with, in the case that how I know you, social media. So I think it's another lesson for our friends that, again, feel stuck with, and in my day work, I was sharing with you before we started recording that I work with a lot of nonprofit managers. We have a network of people that run nonprofit organizations all over the country, and that's part of the reason why I travel to Miami on occasion for work. And one of the things that I talk to these people, whether they're the senior managers or the executive directors, or or even coworkers of mine, or with similar organizations, and they feel again, because of their resume and because of what they've had the opportunity to do, is that they feel a transition to something varied would, it just seems like a big leap for them. And I'm like, first of all, with the modern social media tools and how you can reinvent yourself online, I mean, I'm Ray at night and it's a whole different thing. But I said, the second thing is that you've got to understand that it isn't a conflict. If you've run a social service organization, even if you don't want to make the primary focus of your work moving forward, that particular type of social service, you've developed management skills, you've developed leadership skills, you've developed fundraising skills, right? In doing that work. So it's not a conflict to stretch out of what you're currently doing because it fits in with who you are as a person, your skill set, and when you do this right, your brand. So Tachi, talk about that because maybe it's probably come easier for you than most because you're a communications background, but it's a mental leap for a lot of people that are interested in reinventing themselves, but don't feel comfortable or don't feel they have the capability or the wherewithal to create a brand around themselves. Can you talk about how you felt comfortable growing into that role or having a brand or feeling you were expressing your brand across these different platforms and skill sets?
The brand thing is something that for me just sort of evolved as opposed to sitting down. And, I tried doing this. First of all, I had always taught media, of course, and social media, but I really only became intent on branding myself in terms of social media use, etc. once I started live streaming, which was July of last year. So it hasn't been quite a year yet. So I was on Twitter and I would tweet periodically and retweet stuff, but not like I do now. And so it seemed like once I started live streaming, my use of social media across the board really leapt. Now, of course, I have another business that I do as a designer, and that I use social media for, and I was pretty consistent with that. But everything across the board upped once I started live streaming, and that's when I really started to brand myself and who I was in terms of all things media, tech, and pop culture. That all these things really, really started to evolve then. So it wasn't something that I sat and said, okay, I'm going to make myself A, B, and C brand. It just evolved after a while. And I think that's part of the thing. Sometimes we're too busy trying to decide. You make a mission statement for yourself and a vision statement for yourself as, thinking of yourself as an entity. But sometimes those things need to grow organically. Right. And then it's like, okay, this is what I am. Same thing with the streaming show that I do. And I had all these grandiose plans of what I was going to do in this segment and that segment. And guess what? Eventually, it just kind of grew into what it is now. And I'm like, okay, I don't need to do that. I don't need to do that. And it became what it is. So sometimes the best approach is an organic approach in terms of branding yourself. And it's more of other things branding around you, the things that you're trying to do growing up around you and branding you than you putting a label on what that brand is sometimes, I think.
That's right, Tachi. And you're listening to Dr. Tachi Egwu. We refer to her affectionately as Tachi here on Ray's Talk Show. And thank you for some of the people that have joined the chat, the room here on the Blab platform. If you're watching this live, we super appreciate Hot Sauce and Lex Shirley joining us, as well as Durham Skyrider, one of our great friends who's always supportive of the Ray's Talk Show movement. And for people listening to this as a podcast, thank you again for listening and watching, potentially even the video replay. So before we get in the next segment, I do have an announcement I wanted to mention, really exciting for particularly our podcast community. Tachi, let people know where they can find you in social media and anything else you wanted to shout out before we get into our next segment.
Absolutely. So I am at Tachiada on all platforms, just like on Blab, at TACHIADA on Twitter, on Periscope, on the defunct Meerkat, on every platform. I'm at Tachiada, so that's how you can contact me.
Yeah, rest in peace, Prince. Rest in peace, Meerkat. Rest in peace, Catch. Did you hear about Catch?
Yeah,
closing
yeah,
thing.
yeah. I mean, and that's my thing about why you should never let any one platform be the sole holder of your
That's right.
intellectual property ever.
Amen, sis. That's right. You gotta own your land online. So buy your URL. As I share with people, I said if you don't have your name online, go get it immediately before somebody snatches it up. So I did want to mention again, thank people for checking out Race Talk. So I did want to mention that one thing that's in Tachiada, I definitely want to connect with you offline about this, see how we can collaborate on it. But I've gotten together with a group of podcasters, and we are actually going to be hosting a webinar very soon, probably right after Memorial Day weekend, for people, particularly writers, bloggers, and people that are not podcasting but are content creators and want to develop their own podcast. So we're definitely focusing on diverse communities. So definitely touch out. I got some ideas I wanted to share with you about that. But definitely look out for the Somos Podcaster brand going out there, offering people an opportunity to learn more about how to podcast and be part of a group of diverse voices that are coming together. So really excited and definitely want the people part of this conversation to be a part of that as well. So definitely check out the hashtag Somos Podcasters. Definitely check it out, and our many friends that are part of that. It's interesting, and I have a feeling our new friends in the chat are interested in the lemonade conversation, which we're going to get to in a second. But let me start it by mentioning this to you, Tachi, that I think the lemonade conversation that's taken place in social media over the last 3 or 4 days, particularly amongst people of color and particularly Black women, has been fascinating. And we're going to dive into a few elements of it in a second. But I just wanted to get your initial take on, to me, it's very emblematic of a few things. One is, besides the celebrity and sort of the marketing strategy of Beyonce sort of releasing a provocative new album, I don't even know what to call it now anymore, a CD, group of music, the way she did over the weekend, but that the incredible reaction by her, by her core audience, by women of color, I think it speaks to the craving that so many of us have to have content that's intelligent and provocative from our perspective. And we're just not getting that enough from the corporate media. And we're using these channels to sort of have these underground conversations. So before we get into your thoughts about, what happens, specifically Lemonade, I just want to get your initial reactions to my hypothesis.
You're absolutely right. Your hypothesis is spot on.
Yeah. So why do you think? What do you think about it in a sense that what about this phenomenon? I believe it's these different hashtags, even the political side, right? Like Black Lives Matter. I mean, what about these conversations? What about the conversations that are happening in social media that makes it so passionate? I mean, to me, it just really speaks to the dearth of content that we're getting anywhere else, that we have to create it ourselves.
That's the cool thing about these social media platforms. And I always shout this from the mountains, that you don't have to wait for mainstream media to recognize you anymore, to give you permission to speak, to give you permission to create, to give you permission to speak on your own experience. You don't have to do that anymore. So I understand that these platforms don't have the reach that some of the traditional media do, but it's definitely coming, particularly with some of the things that have happened with, for example, Zuckerberg and Facebook Live, and Facebook really putting emphasis on live video, and everybody else is going to follow suit. And now the big companies are starting to take notice of this. So you don't have to beg traditional media or Hollywood or whoever to accept you as a content creator anymore. As such, we've taken all of these platforms, and we've always done this. People of color have always done this, made a way out of no way. You're not going to give me the soapbox to stand on. I will build my own soapbox out of paper mache and popsicle sticks. So we've always done that. And basically, these social media platforms, when you talk about Black Twitter, when you talk about all of these places where we're putting our voices out there, that's our version of building our paper mache and popsicle stick soapbox platform that nobody else wanted to give us. That's so exactly right. Absolutely right.
That's right. Yeah, no, it was funny when, funny in the sense that it was ironic that last year when NWA, and it was a great movie, and much respect to Dre and Cube for putting that project together. But it was so funny because how the how the mainstream accepted, the movie and that image, when I'm like, I remember they never played them on the radio. They were seen as like the bad boys of media, and they never got any acceptance. And look, even from an older generation of African Americans, because of the title and the. I mean, look, there's a lot of issues with some of the lyrics. I mean, let's keep it real, right? So, I mean, there was a lot of controversy even amongst our own community around NWA, and then how a generation goes by and now there's this mainstream acceptance, which was kind of interesting. But when we've had this conversation, particularly in the Black community around media for certainly the last 15, 20 years, thinking about in my life, the sort of, what people thought about BET, right? There was kind of like, like this very polarizing opinions about BET's place in Black culture and Black conversations. Tyler Perry. I mean, families are broken up over this stuff. Whether you like the Medea movies, you think it's setting the Black community back, and there's these polarizing kind of discussions around Black art and what gets promoted and what doesn't. And my perspective, as a Latino that's very much engaged in these issues with the Black community, is that I said, look, the bottom line is the issue is not Tyler Perry in himself or BET in themselves, is that there's so few people stories and images, and so because we're only getting kind of one side of the one side of the coin, it feels very it feels very one-dimensional view of the Black experience. And so we've been fortunate, obviously the Hudlin brothers and others, we've had an opportunity to have more diverse voices in the mainstream space. But as that's why so many of us have turned to these channels to have these conversations. Tachi, when you've talked to in these conversations you're having, I'm curious with particularly Black and content creators of color, what kind of what do you feel is kind of the conversations or the outlets that people feel is lacking the most, in that either that they want to have the most in terms of when you have your media scopes, your various different. I remember catching a conversation you did. I think I was on a Google Hangout around HBCUs and their future.
Yeah.
What do you feel is, what are the kind of conversations that people are craving the most to have with you and like-minded people on these platforms?
All sorts of conversations, even from the mundane, I shouldn't say mundane, but just regular everyday culture things, to the deep issues that are not covered in the mainstream media. So if you just take a look through, open Periscope, and you take a look through all of the different things that and you look at the people of color, you look at what they're scoping about, that gives you a good idea of some of the things that people really want to talk about, whether it's I just want to tell my story, I'm just up here, or a deep political conversation. There's room for a lot of different things in the space. So I'm getting a sense that people are excited about these platforms. Yeah. Scared and excited about these platforms, because for the first time, you can have a voice, you can create something and put your opinion and put facts out there that the mainstream media doesn't want to talk about. I mean, when we talk about the mainstream media, everything is a process of what's called agenda setting. So there's the agenda setting function of the media, and that's where the media tells you not what to think, but what to think about. So I'm not going to tell you to do A, B, and C, or to think about this, but I will put this out there so this is at the front of your mind so that you can start to think about this. But the problem is, many of the things that they're trying to agenda set are not necessarily the things that we are always interested in. It is their concept of what they think we should be concerned about as people of color. And that's not necessarily what we're concerned about.
That's right. That's right. And it gets to the lemonade conversation that we're going to get to in a second. But I did want to mention, from a Latino perspective, it's really interesting because, there's, one of the equivalent of the sort of BET Tyler Perry conversations occur in terms of, how U.S. based Hispanics that, quite honestly are more, kind of tend to be more educated and more English speaking, how they perceive. Now it's gotten better, but in many ways, Spanish language television was further back in terms of race relations and some of these issues, particularly around race, as it relates to Indigenous and African people and their images and our images on Spanish language television, and so and the lack of substance. So because telenovelas get good ratings, there's a friend of mine, Patricia Guadalupe, who's, I don't know if you know her in DC. She's a political writer in DC. Good people, great Facebook Twitter follower. She's hysterical. And Patricia always comments on when a political debate's happening in the air or the president speaks on, and all the English language channels, simulcast it. She goes, oh, and by the way, the novellas are still talking about their crap, just because, so they're not providing. There's even a big, and because Univision is such a dominant force among Spanish-speaking U.S.-based audiences, it's such a chokehold on the information, and so it's so frustrating for us because we want to get this, more substantive information out to our community, and it's in television could make an even bigger impact because of its reach in that market, but it's been pulled by the corporates, and it's about the bottom line. And then even in the English language landscape, the Devious Maids conversation that took place a few years ago, a show about a group of Latina maids doing, nonsense. And it's funny because a friend of mine is actually the father, a mentor of mine is the father of one of the actresses on the show. And so it's interesting how, some of the conversations happened on Facebook, especially when the show first came out, around how we felt about that show, highlighting, obviously there's plenty of Latinas that are in that industry, but, kind of playing off stereotypes potentially.
Right.
Sexuality and all these different things,
Yeah, and not to interrupt, but it's the same thing with a lot of these roles are stereotypical roles. Those are the roles that are out there in mainstream media, and so it doesn't mean that there are not Latino maids. It does not mean that there are no Medeas. The problem is there's just not a counter narrative that shows the other side of that life. And they're not going to, and we should not expect them to. So anybody, that's why it's kind of in a way with the hashtag Oscar so white. I said, are you surprised? I was not surprised. This is the way they've been operating forever. Unless you happen to be the flavor of the month, this is the way they've been operating. So your intense anger and indignation now is pointless because this has been happening forever. So my thing is, if you really want a counter narrative or you really want to hear another voice, then you really have to turn to these alternative media, because the mainstream media, like you said, it's about the bottom line. Commercials are only put on stations and during shows where there are ratings. It's not going to happen otherwise. So, yeah, it's a really interesting conversation.
Absolutely. So let's get to it. Tachi, speaking about interesting conversations.
Yeah.
So let's talk about hashtag Lemonade for a moment.
Okay.
People are interested, particularly people are interested in the conversation. Hasn't really stopped since Saturday, when Beyonce, essentially out of nowhere, dropped Lemonade after HBO special, and in video and in audio form. So the first question is, Tachi, give us your play-by-play of your analysis of what happened this weekend. The buzz, how you found out about it, the social media conversations. I have some thoughts about sort of how the mainstream reacted going into the week. So just give us your Monday morning quarterback of what took place from a social media analyst perspective with the dropping of Lemonade.
So this is kind of in line with what she did when she dropped the last album, which was a surprise album. It's exclusively on Tidal. So she did the HBO, but I did not see it on HBO because I don't have HBO, but I was able to watch it on Tidal. So it's interesting because we're talking about counter narratives. This is really changing up the model of distribution of how things get out there and how things are received. So, we're in this age of quote unquote free media where there's a lot of stuff you can pick up on YouTube. There's all of this, but this also speaks to the level of control she has over her product and her brand. Stuff does not drop until I say stuff drops. That's basically Beyonce's motto. When I say it's time, that's when it happens, and not a moment before. That's really Beyonce's model of things. So really, I can't, whether you love her, you hate her, and people are on whatever sides of the fence about her, you can't deny that she and Jay-Z are a brilliant marketing team, and they are really, really in charge of their intellectual property and where it happens. And so hence why it was released exclusively on Tidal. So I actually found out about it. I knew something was coming. I tried to keep my ear to the ground, but I listened to a podcast. I don't know if you know the podcast called The Read.
Sure.
Yeah. So I listened to The Read, and they are huge Beyonce fans. It's like they're always following what she does. And so, of course, I was listening to The Read, and I'm like, okay, something's getting ready to fit. And that's...
Well, people like you that are connected, if you hear about things.
Yeah. I usually hear my ears to the ground. And so I'm like, didn't get to see it on HBO, but I knew that I could watch it on Tidal. So I watched it, and, well, I'll get into my feelings after. Go ahead.
No, feel free to jump into it. I wanted to get your perspective on not only, certainly your reflections on the content itself, but also your take on the types of conversations that were happening in social media, particularly with Black women, and I think just in general, and what lessons we can garner from that. Because I thought it was a fascinating weekend just following the conversations. I thought it was really fascinating.
Okay, so it's funny how the conversations have changed in a few short weeks for when she dropped Formation after the Super Bowl performance. So it was, I don't remember if it was a Super Bowl performance. No, Formation dropped the Saturday night. The Super Bowl performance was Sunday, and she performed Formation. So it's interesting how the conversation changed with particularly the Black intelligentsia.
Absolutely.
Which sometimes I love and sometimes I can't stand. And I'm a part of the Black intelligentsia, but sometimes I'm like, every bloody thing doesn't have to be a think piece, please. But this is what we do. Okay, fine. I'm going to leave it at that. And I kept seeing all these think pieces about how she had them in pseudo Black Panther gear and this and that about Formation. And I'm like, bloody hell, I'm not in. So I actually put out there, look, people, don't send me any more think pieces about, because I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to write about it.
Tachi, can I say something real quick? What's funny?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is that you talk about the whole, it's a cultural competency, right? So as a Latino, I was watching that and I was thinking about, wow, is that like an ode to Zapata? Like I'm thinking like the Southwest cowboy guys, you know what I mean? I'm not even
yeah.
Well, that made sense. So then when I saw people talking about the day, I'm like, oh, that's plausible too. It never Black Panthers didn't occur to me. I thought of it like in a whole different way, but it just depends on your perspective, right? But what was interesting about, well, first of all, just in terms of the buzz level, and I felt like I had HBO because of the play-by-play that was going on Twitter, and the reaction was just like incredible, particularly on Twitter, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And then I was sharing with you when we started recording. I found it really interesting because it really, and look, the passionate, provocative conversation that was happening with Black women around, analyzing what this was about. Is this a message? Anything from one extreme to, is this basically her way of sort of, calling out her man to, this is, what it meant for Black women. What was the message she was trying to give to Black women in particular? And then it morphed into an uncomfortable set of conversations on social media around, well, this is about us. And so, if you're not this is content that's really geared towards Black females, and, everyone else is kind of you can obtain it, you can listen to it, but you're not really part of this conversation. So there was a lot of different, kind of strands of things that were happening. And then when the Monday, when the mainstream media was chiming in, their focus was really the non-political angle around, the relationship between Jay-Z and Beyonce at the end of the day, and what was the hidden meeting, and who's Rachel Roy, and, trying to analyze, who's this other woman, or is she talking about her dad, and, kind of the more salacial elements of it. So, what were your thoughts about how the conversation and the conversations veered over, as the hours unfolded?
So it's interesting. So we go from Formation, and then this album drops, and visual album, and so I'll talk about the visuals in it, which I think were absolutely beautiful. But I want to talk about the actual, with your question, but let me just say the visuals were absolutely beautiful. Whoever shot, it took an awful lot of orchestration.
Oh, yeah.
So even just for that, this project is to be respected just for the cinematography, just for the amount of everything that it took to put this together. So that was fantastic, and I'll talk more about that later. But the conversations that again, going from Formation where things were largely contentious to this where they're still contentious, but it seems like there was a lot more support for what she was doing with this from the time that she did Formation and the Super Bowl performance to now. And so you're hearing a lot of course, there's think pieces. We always have think pieces, but there's a lot more positivity in terms of what this means, in terms of for the first time now. And it took somebody like a Beyonce to be able to do this, because she has that type of pop culture power, that she can drop these types of things and not be apologetic for it. And it seems as if like this is her, if she was a little girl before, she's a woman now.
Absolutely.
This was her way of purging. This was her way of growing up. This was her way of transitioning. And again, none of us really know everything that is involved. She's a very private person.
That's right.
Jay-Z and Beyonce are a very private couple. So we don't know. Everybody can speculate all day long what everything means.
Right? So like, people are actors. People are artists.
Absolutely.
They're expressing it. And, whether it's, you want to call it vaguely honest or what have you, part of art is to keep us questioning, keep us on our toes. And
exactly.
Is it an ode to Black women? Is it provocative art? It's all subject to interpretation.
Absolutely. That's what artists do. Artists interpret. This could be, clearly interpretive. It doesn't necessarily have to all be true. We don't know. The speculation is that this comes from someplace, because usually when you make art, it comes from someplace. Especially this type of hard-hitting, truth-telling art, it comes from someplace. But it could be an amalgamation of a lot of different things. And so we just have to remember that. But in terms of this, is this an ode to Black women? Absolutely. Is this for Black women? Absolutely. Can other people enjoy it? Absolutely. But don't feel like you always have to have your hands in the Kool-Aid or in the sauce and it be about you. And I think that's the big thing that got me once it turned to the conversations of the whole Becky thing, and when it turned to the conversations of well, why is this just for Black? Damn it, everything does not have to be about you. And I get really raw when it comes to these things, because most of the world tends to be about the mainstream and not people of color. When you try to create and carve your own space that is for you, which, by the way, you've excluded us from the other parts of mainstream. Now, you've excluded us. So we said, let's carve out these parts. I want to show the beauty of Black women. I want to talk about this. Now you have a problem. But you didn't want us to sit at your table in the first place. And when we built our own paper mache and popsicle stick table, now you want to sit at this raggedy table too. You don't have to be included in every conversation.
And when people were criticizing and attacking with a lot of self-hate and racist or self-hate undertones, when they were attacking Blue Ivy because Jay-Z and Beyonce had her hair in a natural little afro, where were those people defending her? So you can't have a place. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And for the most part, that was us criticizing Blue Ivy.
That's what I was saying.
That was
self-hatred.
But but it's self-hatred. But I mean, that becomes internalized because of centuries of being taught that these things are not to be loved. And you pass that down. And here you have this beautiful little girl in her natural state. Well, how else are you supposed to wear your hair but how it comes out of your head? So you have this, and then she's the topic of scrutiny, and the parenting skills are in called into question. So it's just that whole ridiculousness. But it's okay.
Right. So no, it definitely started a lot of conversation from a media perspective. Tachi, what for the rest of us that aren't superstars like Beyonce, what lessons should we have around branding, marketing, owning our content that we should take away from this power move by Beyonce releasing Lemonade over the weekend on her own?
Yes. Control your image, control your own content, make sure you own it. We could take that takeaway from Prince as well. Okay. And a lot of different artists. Yeah, rest in peace. That was something that was, really heavy. That was really heavy. And it's ironic that, this great man passes away. And then we have, a little bit later, Beyonce drops this, and it's this whole lesson in ownership and having your own, basically, that you have these two. And I'm not comparing Beyonce to Prince. You cannot. Prince is in his own realm. But the thing is, it speaks to the fact that you need to think. You need to think and be more proactive in terms of making sure your intellectual property is your own. I think sometimes, especially as people of color, and I understand where this comes from, for so long you don't have, and then you get an opportunity to put your work out there, to be someone, to possibly gain some wealth, and you just give everything up for that right to do that, or for the opportunity to do that, not realizing that it's like with, your house. The house is not the valuable thing that you own. It's the land that the house is on that's valuable. Because tomorrow your house could blow down, and if you don't have ownership on that land, that the house is minuscule in terms of that. It's the land. So that's the whole thing. So it's not about the recording contract that you have with XYZ company. It's about, do you own your publishing? Do you control your images? And I think that's an interesting, really important point that this whole drop of Lemonade and her last album has put out there. And I think we're going to see more of this in the music landscape.
The other thing that speaks to, it's a lesson for all of us, is using your platform to uplift others. And, one of the great things that came out of Lemonade was she gave a lot of artists and a lot of important people in our community some shine. Others are Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Gardner, someone who I'm not familiar with. I need to do some research on, the British Somali poet Warsan Shire.
Yes,
really powerful from everything I've read. Serena Williams, of course, which I think off the heels of why anyone would ever criticize this woman ever, and thinking about, and we've had this conversation on the show before, but thinking about how essentially, phenotypically white people, like women like Kim Kardashian and even some of the Latinas that are full figured get celebrated, and Serena Williams is criticized looking manly for basically the same body type, right? So the fact that in the midst of everything, the heels of that, for Beyonce to stand in solidarity and give her that platform was very powerful. And even some of the up and coming celebrities she mentioned, Zendaya's on there, Amanda Stenberg,
it
was on A. Wallace. So, I mean, the fact that she's generous enough to give some of the up and comers and people that we wouldn't know, like some of these poets and others, some shine, I think is another lesson, because we talk about this in the old days, the crab in a bucket mentality. Now the good news, I think a lot of our communities past that, particularly our generation, Tachi, but we have to really live in the spirit of abundance, and I think that's another lesson that Beyonce taught us this weekend as well.
Absolutely. I mean, this is just the fact that she included so many of these great voices and sometimes uncelebrated and unsung voices in this album, in this effort, is phenomenal because it was, and going back to that whole, the whole Serena Williams thing, there is a villainization of Black women in the media and Black women's images, going all the way back to this, when was it, about 2 years ago, that piece of pseudo research in what is it, Psychology Today, which is kind of like a pop culture thing, not a real psychology magazine, came out where there was a study done that found that Asian men and Black women are not as desirable and not seen as, well, Black women in particular, not seen as beautiful. And I'm like, I'm sorry, who did you, what is the strength of it? And, you know, I'm a researcher, so I know. I'm like, what kind of pseudo research is this rubbish? And why is this important to know in the scheme of things? What is this going to show? When you do social scientific research, you're supposed to be making a contribution to your field, thus a contribution to society. In what way does this contribute in any way, shape, or form? It's rubbish. Consequently, they took it down. But there's that villainization has been there forever, but that really was a strong point in terms of mainstream media showing the lack, quote unquote, lack of beauty of Black women. So now you have this where one of the most beautiful women in the world compiles an effort that highlights the beauty of Black women, the intelligence of Black women, the creativity of Black women. And so I think this is really powerful, whether you like Beyonce or not, because it's not like I'm a huge, oh, I have to get Beyonce's next album. Not at all. But I can appreciate the beauty of the counter narrative that she set up with this album, counter to everything else that people in society say about Black women.
Absolutely. No, this is, it's been a great conversation, Tachi. It's, you know, it's something that, you know, we try to, in Ray's Talk Show, try to keep on top of mind. You know, I had a few episodes during Black History Month with Afro-Latinas, talking about these conversations around parenting, hair texture. There's been, as you know, with the Puerto Rico economic crisis, there's been a resurgence of the Puerto Rican diaspora organizing. And I was just at an event in New York a few weeks ago. And I don't know if you're familiar with the great academic and great leader of the Afro-Latino movement, Dr. Magda Moreno Vega, led a workshop during that conference saying, look, you know, as we're talking about these economic issues, we need to talk about the racism within our community. And there was a really interesting conversation that took place, led by Afro-Latino women primarily, around, you know, some of the research they've done around how, you know, there's this huge percentage of people that are incarcerated on the island of Puerto Rico from like 3 of the smallest towns, which happen to be where the predominant Afro-Latino Puerto Rican neighborhoods are on the island. And so, you know, if things like this that are in a lot of other cultures are sort of not talked about in those terms, and the fact they were bringing them to light was really fascinating, and, you know, something we try to support here as much as possible on Ray's Talk Show, because if we don't understand who we are, we can't get to this other stuff. And, you know, we're spending all this money straightening our hair and lightening ourselves. And, you know, first of all, it gets too expensive to do all this stuff. And we should just be happy with who the hell we are, because there's nothing wrong with us. You know, the whole world's trying to be like us, and we're trying to deny ourselves. So it's these are important conversations here to have Ray's Talk Show. We really want to thank so much Dr. Tachi, as I like to refer to her, for being our ray of light for today on the show, and wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to give any shout outs or anything else you wanted to share with our Ray's Talk Show listeners.
Well, thank you for having me, Ray. Finally, we meet. Finally, I get a chat. Finally, I look decent at this hour so that I can be on camera. But I just think it's really important to look at Lemonade and all subsequent types of art that is produced by people of color as something that speaks to the fact that now we have platforms where we can say what we want. The way she released it on Tidal, and it's exclusively on Tidal, that's a big deal. That's really the future of where these types of the content creation is going. It's not going to go through the big majors anymore. It's already starting to happen, right, and they're starting to have to take notice. I go to conferences all the time, television industry conferences, news conferences, and, you know, often all of us that are on these platforms, we are on the in the ground stages of this movement, because a lot of them are clueless as to these things. You'll ask questions and they're like, well, I didn't know about that platform, because they're keyed into something else. They still think with a mainstream mindset. So those of us, especially those of us of color that are thinking with this new media mindset, we need to do something. We need to unleash the inner Beyonce and release our lemonades. That's what we need to do. Release your inner Beyonce and release.
That's a great quote. And really quick, that's real quick, but we didn't get a chance to give our people a quick tip. You're such a great Periscoper. For people that want to get into the Periscope game or feel timid about it, like, I don't know about, it seems egotistical and you're talking and give people people a little tip, get people to understand the power of live streaming, and in particular the Periscope, which is one of your expertises.
Okay, it's huge. It's huge. I just talked about the fact that Facebook announced during their F8 developers conference that they are really plummeting everything, or putting everything into live video. So, and Mashable, they laid off some of their editorial staff, which I don't know was a wise move, but they laid off a good number of editorial staff because they were focusing more on video and live. So this tells you that this is a big area to get into. So it's critically important that you get in there. Even if you don't want to be on camera, I think there are ways that you can be involved, be a producer, work on writing for some of these things, come up with ideas, collaborate with people that do want to be on camera so that you can get your voice in the space, because it's critically important that people of color embrace live streaming because there's such power in it. Much respect to our homie Tony R. Sanders, who I had on the show a few weeks ago, who has done literally over 250 days straight a scope and has really developed a great brand with his Good Morning, God Bless Periscope show he does in the morning. And, and his thing was, look, I did 75 before anyone even saw me. But again, it's like we talked about earlier, you work your material, you find your voice, and people give you the reaction about what they like about what you do. And you'll get that direction, but you got to spit it out. I think that's so important. If you're going to tap into your inner Beyonce, you gotta start by expressing yourself and building your own platform online. And like you said, not only just own the house, but own the land. So, and again, I want to remind people, check out, keep an eye out for the Somos Podcaster crew. Our friend Felix Montalado, who's part of our Somos Podcasters posse, is with us here. And I'm sure after we stop taping, he'll jump on and say hello to Itachi. But we're going to be providing more services and resources for people that want to podcast, or maybe have started podcasting but want to grow their presence and create more platforms for podcasters from diverse communities to tap into inner Beyonce. Tachi, remind people they can find you on social media, and as we wrap up this episode of Ray's Talk Show. I am at Tachiada, at Tachiada, on all platforms, Twitter, Periscope, Snapchat, everywhere. I am at Tachiada. Also, you can, my webpage, chetachi.me, and I'll put that in the chat. Absolutely, and it'll be in the show notes when you go to bigbrotherray.com, and you can watch the replay of the show as well as listen to the podcast. And anyway, you can listen to Ray's Talk Show as a podcast. You can find us iTunes, now Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, anywhere you can find a podcast, you can find us. But again, you can go to you can find all our content live and replay and pre-produced at bigbrotherray.com, and please sign up for our email newsletter, because you'll have more information about getting down with the Somos Podcaster family. Check us out at hashtag Somos Podcaster, and you can always email me at info@Ray's Podcast. If you just want to get in touch with me, potentially be on the show or learn more about our products and services. Thank you so much, Tachi. Thank you so much for our crew, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.